Exodus, Road to Freedom. And we always start off a sermon with an illustration. So for our illustration today, here's a question for you. We'll start off with a question. Which would you prefer, freedom or safety? Because the truth is, you can't have both, at least not in the way that people normally think about safety. We're going to trace a little bit. I've been saying over and over again, this Exodus, this event that happened in the 1200s BC, it changed the course of world history. It brought about an end of the Bronze Age, the way we think about that time period in the history of the world. It also brought into the world and into the surrounding nations around Egypt and Israel, it brought in ideas about freedom. No one had really ever thought about freedom before the Israelites left Egypt. And that idea, it was like a seed that started to grow in different nations, and it produced all kinds of crazy things. And it is something that has grown right down to the present time. Our current ideas about freedom come from the Exodus. They really do. Check this out. All right, so this is sort of the first nation that really latched on to the ideas of freedom that came out of the Exodus, apart from the Israelites, and that is the Greeks. Do we have any Greeks in the house today? Yeah, a couple. They're not very loud. I think the Greeks used to be a lot louder than they are now. Maybe they're still loud. I don't know. So this is a scene. This is a depiction of a scene from the Odyssey. I thought I had something from the Iliad there too. Oh yeah, I do. The Rage of Achilles. You can see in the Iliad and the Odyssey, which were foundational for Greek culture, and which really, even though they depict scenes from the Bronze Age, they really are written down and composed after the Exodus of the Israelites. And what happened after the Israelites left Egypt is many nations around them started to say, wait a minute, maybe it's actually possible to get out from underneath these tyrants who are ruling and oppressing us. Why did they start to think that? Because they saw a nation do it. That's why. And in the Iliad and the Odyssey, you see all kinds of ideas of freedom. The word isn't used a whole lot, but you see it over and over. I mean, this is the Rage of Achilles. This is a scene where Achilles is actually threatening Agamemnon, who is the king of the Greeks. He's threatening him because he's trying to tell him what to do. And the whole idea is, you can't tell me what to do. At least each little warlord gets to decide for themselves. There's going to be these city-states that are going to run themselves, not some pharaoh or some divine king who's going to run everything. And you can even see the idea extends into ideas of the inner self, right? In this scene, this is the famous scene where Odysseus, or Ulysses in the Latin, he straps himself onto the mast of a ship so that the sirens, he doesn't listen to their song. He doesn't want to have them bewitch him, right? This is an image of him fighting for internal freedom, fighting a battle within. So these ideas continue, they develop. Here's a really interesting ancient Greek quote. I'm not going to try to say it in Greek while there are Greek speakers present. That would be crazy. I'll read it in English. It's better to die than to live badly. And in the context of this quotation, which comes from the 400s BC, live badly means to live under the oppression of a king. You could also sort of paraphrase this as it's better to be free. It's better to die than to live without freedom. This progressed. We're going to jump a whole bunch of time, but these ideas of freedom progressed mostly in Europe through all the Middle Ages and right up to the time of colonization, people moving to the New World. These were huge ideas. And actually, when pilgrims and Puritans came to North America for the first time, British North America at the time, they explicitly saw themselves as following in the footsteps of the Exodus. So when we talk about Exodus as a road to freedom, and I've said God did something in the Exodus that then many people later, and even us today, we can follow in the same road at many different levels. It has been followed in history. This is an image of the pilgrims boarding a ship, the Mayflower, I think this is actually in the Netherlands where they boarded the Mayflower. Moving forward, the American Revolution is inspired by these same ideas. And this is a quote from Patrick Henry, which is much like that ancient Greek quote, "Give me liberty or give me death." And then this guy. Does anybody know this guy? I mean, this is, well, so we love this play. Raise your hand or give me noise if you're a Hamilton fan, if you like Hamilton, okay. Raise your hand if you could sing every word to every song in Hamilton. Okay, just curious who we've got in the room. So this is King George III from Hamilton, and he's hilarious. If you've never seen this, it's just phenomenal, this song. It's very sarcastic. He is the tyrant, right? And the whole thing about him, the way he portrays himself is he's so kind. He's the kind tyrant, right? He just loves the colonies. It's just that they have to do whatever he says or he's going to kill them, right? And so you'll be back. Soon you'll remember that you belong to me, right? And at the end, he has this very famous line, right? "I will kill your friends and family to remind you of my love," right? Why do people stay under a tyrant, though? That's the question. Whoever that tyrant is, it really is a matter of contemplating, deciding, weighing whether you prefer freedom or safety, right? That quote is better to die than to live badly, or give me freedom or give me death, right? This is the idea that freedom and safety are actually, it's very hard to have both at the same time. And in fact, it's impossible if you're talking about safety in the way we normally think of it in the world. And this is going to be very important as we go into our message today, because you are going to see, as you use your imagination to think about what's happening to the Israelites as they leave Egypt in that first moment, they are abandoning safety. They are abandoning everything they know, their entire way of life that they've known for hundreds of years. They have no idea what they're going to find, and the only safety that they have left, there is no human safety left for them. All that they have left is to simply trust that the Lord, the God who's called them out, is going to take care of them. That's the only thing they can do, and that's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. But it's the only true freedom. The only true freedom is to be trusting in the Lord and worshiping Him as the central principle of your life. That's what true freedom is. All right. That was our illustration. We're in this series, Exodus Road to Freedom. We've gone a long way. Let me remind you where we're at. The series is about freedom from Pharaoh, from the tyrant, but it's also about freedom from sin. God is trying to do something within the people of Israel. And as we've seen in recent weeks, it's not just the people of Israel He's trying to change. It's all people. It's the Egyptians as well, who are devastated by all the plagues that God sends on them. But He is doing it for their good. We said that recently. The plagues are an expression of the Lord's love for Israel and Egypt. How can that be? He kills thousands of the Egyptians in these plagues. It's because He is doing a deep kind of surgery. He is actually breaking down the false beliefs of the Egyptian nation. Have you ever had a time period in your life when God broke you down? God allowed things to come that broke you down, and then you saw later how He used that. It's only after you felt devastated and wondered, why is this happening to me, that you were able to be rebuilt in ways that you needed to grow. That's how He works. The plagues are the destruction of Egypt. Israel and Egypt are to be reborn. We talked about that. The plagues we went through, we've gone through all these already. There was a plague of blood. There was a plague of frogs. There was a plague of flies. First gnats or lice or mosquitoes, and then flies. There was a plague of the livestock. The livestock in the fields just start to die. And as I'm showing you these things again to remind you and help you to use your imagination to think about what was happening. What was it like in Egypt at that moment? What was it like for the Egyptians? What was it like for the Israelites? All these things have happened over a period of many months. This has been going on, this big battle between Pharaoh and the Lord, between Pharaoh and Moses in some ways. There was a plague of boils. They broke out on people's skin, and people couldn't even move out of their beds for a period of time. There was a plague of hail, and remember we talked about last week, hail and lightning. The final plagues, the first number of plagues are to destroy the Egyptian system of magic, their belief in their own wizards and sorcerers. The last few plagues are to destroy their belief in the Pharaoh. The Pharaoh was believed to control nature, to control lightning and hail and things like that. But not now. The Lord is controlling it. Locusts. The locusts begin to darken the sky, and then actually a plague of darkness comes. Pharaoh was believed to be the sun god Ra, the sun god himself. And darkness takes over the land for a period of 3 days. So God is destroying for the Israelites and the Egyptians any kind of belief they had in this false system, this false religion that they'd had. The Egyptians had had it for thousands of years, this false religion. And then the final plague was the death of the firstborn. And we looked at that last week and looked just a little bit at the Passover and what happens in that moment. So I'm going to remind you of the Passover and the death of the firstborn. We're going to look at what the Israelites do with that, or what God does for the Israelites with that, helping them to remember that in future generations. And then we're going to look today just at the Israelites actually leaving Egypt and getting to the Red Sea, and we'll leave it at the cliffhanger on the edge of the Red Sea at the end of the message today. So the firstborn in Egypt die. And this last plague, we said, this is different than the rest because it doesn't really have much at all to do with Egyptian religion. This plague is about creating a new way of life. And this idea of the firstborn, the most beloved, the best in those cultures, right? Not maybe really the best, the way we think of it, but the best in those cultures, the first fruit of the marriage, that has to die in order that forgiveness for sin can come, in order that the destroying angel can pass over the Israelites and not destroy them. And for the Egyptians, all of these firstborn children died. Firstborn of every human family, firstborn male, and the firstborn of every animal. This is total devastation. It's not just the humans even. It's the entire kingdom, all the way down through the animal kingdom. God is preparing a new way of life for them. That's what I'm saying here. And the Passover event itself. So what's really interesting as we look at the text in Exodus is, some people have said throughout history, I'm sure you're aware of this, that these are just kind of myths that were made up, and they have great literary value, and they inspired people, but they're not actual real events. And I got to tell you, these are not written in any way like a myth. They are in some ways. Exodus has great literary value in some ways, but in other ways, it's written not at all the way you would write something if you wanted it to sell well. It's not written like the Iliad and the Odyssey, not at all. You know this yourself if you've ever read the Bible. If you think about a lot of these books open up with a genealogy or a long section where they're just counting the Israelites and who their different families are. That's actually how the book of Exodus opens up. Is that how you would write if you were going to get a New York Times bestseller? Would you open up with a genealogy or a list of numbers of people? Of course not. You would only write that way if you were writing it for the actual people who had gone through these events. That's the only people to whom those lists make any sense. And when we look at chapter 12 and 13, and we're a little bit in 14 today, that's where we're at in Exodus, you can see the same thing in these chapters. It's not just the story of the Passover and the death of the firstborn in Egypt told in some dramatic style. No. It's a long, detailed explanation of how the Israelites are supposed to celebrate the Passover from now on. That's what these chapters are. In fact, telling what actually happened in the moment is sort of secondary to telling them, how are you going to remember this? And there's all this information about, you've got to have this feast, and it's got to be it's got to happen on the first day of the year. You're going to start raising this baby lamb or baby goat. Then 2 weeks later, here's what you're going to do with it. You're going to slaughter it at midnight, and then you're going to cook it. You're going to cook it in this particular way, and then you're going to eat it in a particular way. You're going to eat it really fast with your cloak tucked into your belt. And there's all these details, immense amount of detail that would bore people if they had not been through those events. This book is written for people who are actually going to use it to worship the Lord and remember something that really happened. Amazing. Okay, so here we go. I'll read some of this and we'll make some observations. We already did some of this last week on the Passover. At midnight, the Lord struck down the firstborn of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who is in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. In every house, someone was dead. And you can write this in your notes. We've already made this observation a number of times, but sacrifice is required to escape judgment for sin. And we're going to see this in the Israelite side of it. This, what we just read, is the Egyptian side of it, right? The Egyptians, there is someone in every house who's dead. What does that mean? Every person is full of sin. And the penalty for sin is death. The Bible is very clear about that from beginning to end. The penalty for turning away from God, for not trusting Him, following Him, and in fact, not just the penalty. We could even say the automatic consequence for sin. It's not even like God is up there and He says, I just really don't like that these people have sinned or broken my rules, so I'm going to kill them. It's not like that. It's like God actually has to hold Himself back. And we see this again and again in Exodus and later in the Torah, the other first 5 books of the Bible. We see again and again that whenever people are close to God, if sin has not been dealt with in the right way, being close to God in a sinful state simply kills them. It's not God's active decision. This is why God holds back from the world. Many people have asked, why doesn't God just show up right in front of me? Because it would destroy you. That's why. Sacrifice is required to escape judgment for sin. So there's this blood sacrifice. And this is, of course, all preparing the Israelites to understand way later, 1,300 years later, what's going to happen with Jesus, who is the ultimate and final blood sacrifice to deal with sin. Sacrifice is required. So here's the way out. Here's an image. This is great. I found some images by modern Jewish artists. This one is the Exodus by Yoram Rainin. And you can see in this moment, you've got the people of Israel going out. And you can see even, it's kind of abstract a little bit. It's dark. They leave the nation. They leave Egypt in the middle of the night, because that's when this event takes place. It's at midnight that the firstborn all die. And it's before the sun rises that Pharaoh and the Egyptians kick the Israelites out. They say, go, get out of here as fast as you can. Oh, and bless us on your way out. But get out before we all die. If you've been imagining along with me, you can see why, the feeling that must have been present in Egypt. It was terror. It was sheer terror. And I think for the Israelites as well. During the night, Pharaoh summoned Moses and Aaron and said, get up. Leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go worship the Lord as you have requested. And here, he's giving them their freedom. And this is what they've been asking for the whole time. And you remember, how many chances has God given the Egyptians, given Pharaoh specifically, to simply do what he's asking him to do, to give freedom. And the freedom is not just freedom to be out of slavery. And that's clear throughout the whole story. It is freedom to leave slavery and to worship the Lord in the wilderness. And there is no freedom without the worship of the Lord. There is no true freedom. So he finally says yes, after he said no many, many times, more than 10 times actually. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go and bless me also. So you can see the mix of emotions that's in Pharaoh. Ramses II, his son, We know his name, Amun Her-Kepesheth, is dead. His 40-year-old son, who was the crown prince of Egypt, is dead on that night. He is overwhelmed. Pharaoh finally realizes that his nation is ruined, and it is. His reign personally will continue for quite a long time, but it will only go downhill, and his successors will run the nation into the ground as a result, I think, of all that's happened here. And his dynasty will end within 75 years. And the nation of Egypt will be ruled by foreign powers for the next 500 years. The nation is ruined. Take your herds and flocks, go and bless me also. Bless me. Say a prayer for me. The Egyptians urged the people to hurry and leave the country, for they said, otherwise we will all die. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. And this is another place, this image, and that's what I was trying to depict with this guy right here. You can see a little bit, I think, in the abstract image, the women carrying kneading troughs on their shoulders with like a bundle inside of it. And this has been, for me, a really powerful image. I don't know why, other than that it's so detailed. It's so detailed. And Exodus is strange. It's unusual in many ways. The focus on the Israelite women in Exodus is unlike anything else in ancient history. Unlike anything else. And this is an image of the women, how they're leaving. The men are leaving armed for war. They are leaving with whatever weapons they can. They are formed up into divisions, actually. We're not sure how Moses did all of that, but it's clear they marched out ready for war. The women are leaving sort of ready for war in their own way. They are ready to supply the troops and the entire nation in the field. They have prepared bread, but without yeast because there's no time. Everything's in a rush. And they've got it on their shoulders, and they've wrapped it in clothing. That's what the bag that they packed. There's no suitcase. They wrapped the clothing around their only food source, apart from the animals. I don't know. You can tell me later if that's powerful for you. I can't get that out of my mind. I don't know why. The Israelites did as Moses instructed. They asked the Egyptians for articles of silver and gold and for clothing. This is what we talked about earlier in the offering time. And this is where the Israelites plunder the Egyptians in some sense, but not by force. They simply go to the Egyptians and they say, can I please have all your gold and silver and jewelry and clothing? And the Egyptians say, yes, take it all. And the reason is twofold. They're terrified, and they are also coming to a deep realization that all the things they had believed in before are not true. And if you've ever, many of you perhaps grew up in church and so didn't go through a stage where your whole worldview was destroyed. Many of you have gone through a stage where you questioned everything, and what you thought was true about the world, you found out it was false. I have been through that stage myself as a young adult. It is profoundly disorienting. You don't know, you feel like there is no life anymore. Like how can I even move forward? Their whole world has come crashing to the ground. And so they give to the Lord also, not only out of fear, but as a sign of worship. This is how you worship a god in the ancient world. The Egyptians, it's not like they're only worshiping the Lord. I'm not saying the Egyptians are Jewish at this moment, but they are worshiping the Lord in some way. The Lord had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people. The Israelites journeyed from Ramses to Succoth. There were about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. Only the men are counted, partly because that's what you did in the ancient world, but also partly because we're talking about an army here. That's how they're going to be viewed in Exodus. Many other people went with them, also large droves of livestock, both flocks and herds. That means sheep and goats. That's why you have flocks and herds. With the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. The length of time the Israelites people lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, the Lord's divisions left Egypt. And this is one of those places. The Lord's divisions is military language used of the people of Israel in the Exodus. All right. So that's powerful. It goes on, as I talked about before, to describe how the Israelites are to keep these traditions, how they're going to celebrate Passover. The Lord kept vigil for you that night, and so you are going to keep vigil. The Lord passed over. We've already read that one, or one just like it. The next section that we'll look at is actually their march to the sea. So the Israelites now have had their initial exit from Egypt. They've gone through that Passover moment where they sacrificed the lamb. They put the blood on the door frames of the houses. The destroying angel actually really just, I think, the Lord came near. And his very presence destroys. It destroys what's not pure, which is all human beings. But because of the sacrifice of the lamb, his presence passes over. It has mercy on the Israelites who have put their faith in him. They put their trust in him by this act. And so it's totally different for us today, and yet it's exactly the same. We put our trust in the Lord Jesus, that his sacrifice is what saves us, that his sacrifice will bring us forgiveness for sin. And when we put our trust in him, we do things, right? We follow different practices that are acts of faith. Sometimes God will ask us to do very scary things. Most of the time, it's just going to be regular practices like going to church on a Sunday, like giving to the Lord. These are things we do to honor him. And because of that, we are forgiven. Not because of the things that we do, but because of our trust in God and because of Jesus. I'm just going to wait 1 second, guys. We got a lot of noise going on. So once we get that wrapped up, we'll move on. Awesome. Our friends at Faith Lutheran Church must be having a party. I don't know. They're usually still in the middle of church right now. And they're usually so quiet. Their church is quieter than ours, so I don't know what's going on today. All right, so the next section is to the sea. And this is where things get really crazy for the Israelites. Now, I don't know if you had this experience, but leaving what you are used to, entering a new life of faith, that sounds like such a nice thing. God is going to take care of me now. I'm not going to be oppressed in all these ways, or I'm not going to have all these false beliefs that held me down. The truth is, as we said at the beginning, that freedom is terrifying. It really can be terrifying. And this is what happens to the Israelites next, because nothing is like it used to be. Everything is new. And the only way that they can survive is if God provides for them. This is, I've given you lots of images from the 1800s, in the 19th century, there were lots of artists who did depictions of the Exodus and stories from the Bible. This is The Pillar of Fire by Paul Hardy. And you have this image of hundreds of thousands of Israelites and this immense, they don't even know what it is. I mean, and that's the sense you get as you read Exodus over and over again, is they are trying to describe what happened to them, a real thing that happened, and yet it is so unlike any kind of regular human experience. There are moments when they are at a loss. Like, what is going on right now? When Pharaoh let them go, he let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. There's going to be a lot of geographical details in here. God doesn't take them the fast way to where they're eventually going. He takes them on a very long route. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. I mean, this is almost funny because where God is going to lead them is to the Red Sea. And if I could think of anywhere that would terrify me the most, I think it would be, I've got the ocean on one side of me, a body of water that's absolutely impossible to cross, and I've got the most powerful army in the world on the other side of me trying to kill me. What could be scarier than that? And yet God takes them to the Red Sea, the text says, as kind of a concession to them, because they don't yet trust him enough to face war. He thinks they're going to want to return to Egypt. And they are, as many of you know. They're going to want to return to Egypt many times. So God led the people around the desert toward the Red Sea. The Israelites went up out of Egypt ready for battle. They go up armed somehow. Maybe they asked for weapons as well. I'm not sure. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him because Joseph had made the Israelites swear an oath. He had said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. Joseph has been dead for hundreds of years at this point. So once again, in the text, we have this reminder that God is sovereign over history. He's the one that is in control. Even during those hundreds of years when the Israelites were crying out and it seemed like their prayers were not being answered, God knew about that the whole time. He was in control of all of it from the beginning. After leaving Succoth, they camped at Etham on the edge of the desert. Many of these are places we don't know what they refer to, which is really interesting. These are location details that the Israelites knew. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night, which explains something, right? You might ask, if you were really imagining the situation, the Israelites flee Egypt in the middle of the night? This is the Bronze Age. How? Are they all carrying torches? How do they see anything? Is it a full moon? Is that what's going on? And they can just see barely? But that seems like a huge logistic operation to pull off. The answer is the pillar of fire. God literally puts this huge light in front of them so that they can travel in the middle of the night, even though there are hundreds of thousands of them, if not even more than that. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Tell the Israelites to turn back and camp near Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea. They are to encamp by the sea directly opposite Baal-zephon." We don't know, there's no confirmation on the location of any of these places. Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. So like other places in the Bible, which some of you will know, God, in a sense, sets them up. He takes them to a place where he knows when Pharaoh hears about it through his spies or whoever's watching this huge mass of Israelites, this entire nation, Pharaoh's going to think they have no idea what they're doing. They're lost in the desert. And this is going to inspire Pharaoh to come after them. So God instigates Pharaoh coming to attack them. What? Does God instigate things in our lives that we don't like? He does sometimes. He does it for our good. He's doing this for a reason. Let's see what the reason is. I will harden or strengthen Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. But I will gain glory for myself through Pharaoh and his army. I think that piece is for the Israelites. He's going to gain glory. The Israelites are now going to come to know their faith is going to deepen when they go through the Red Sea. That's the whole point. Well, almost the whole point. Here's the other part of the point. And the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. So here you can see it as clearly as anywhere. Many of you have expressed surprise to me as we've been talking over the past couple of weeks, and I've said that God is not just helping the Israelites. He is helping the nation of Egypt. Here it is in plain black and white. He did all this, not just for the Israelites, but so that the Egyptians would come to know that he is the one true God. He loves all of them. He chose the Israelites for a special purpose. He loves all human beings, every nation on earth from the beginning. He is always working to bring us back to himself. The king hardens his heart, just as God said. What have we done? We've lost their services. Our nation's already ruined, and now we're going to be poor because we don't have any slaves. So he gets all his chariots. He gets his chariot. He took his army with him. He took 600 of his best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them. This might not seem like a large number to you. It's probably thousands of chariots, but 600 of the best. This is the state of the art of military technology in the Bronze Age. This is like, think about tanks on the field, like modern warfare, because that's what it felt like to them. You cannot stand against chariots if you are on foot in the ancient world. Impossible. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. He pursued the Israelites who were marching out boldly. The Egyptians, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, horsemen and troops, they pursued the Israelites to Pi-hahiroth, opposite Baal-zephon. Pharaoh approaches. The Israelites look up, and there were the Egyptians. And again, even the way it's written, you get the sense this is being written by people who were there. We didn't have spies out. We didn't have scouts. We just looked up, and all of a sudden, here is Pharaoh's entire army bearing down on us, and they're terrified, and they cry out to the Lord. And I want to ask you this question. We'll wrap up with this next section here. We're almost done. Do the Israelites have faith at this moment? And I just want you to think about that, because it is a trick question. Do they have faith? Do they trust in the Lord? They certainly cry out to the Lord, because there's no one else to cry out to. There's no other hope in this moment. But they also say this. They say to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt?" So they've lost their safety. The Israelites have freedom. They now have the freedom to interact directly with the God who made them, to worship him, to be led by him, to be provided for by him. It's a whole new way of life. They do not have human safety anymore, because those two things don't really go together. And they are terrified. Do they have faith in this moment? It's easy to look at the Israelites and go, they've seen all these miracles. They saw God, turn the water into blood and bring hail and the plague of the firstborn. They can see right at this moment, they can see the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire. That's probably the daytime, so probably the pillar of cloud at this moment. They can see it. How do they not trust the Lord? Would you trust the Lord at this moment? I think I would have been exactly like them. I would have cried out to the Lord, and I would have also been really, really scared and probably angry that we had not made a better plan. Why in the world did we get ourselves trapped in front of the Red Sea, Moses? This is a stupid plan. What's your plan to get us out of this? We cannot beat the Egyptians. They continue complaining to him. And Moses answers, and we'll wrap up with this thought. I'll give you the points as well right after it, but we'll wrap up with this thought from Scripture. Moses answers in this way. Moses has deep faith at this moment, but Moses has gone through a lot more than the rest of the Israelites. It takes time to build faith. Do not be afraid, he says. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Let me go to my last couple points here. Maybe we already passed through them. We'll pray, and we'll continue in worship.